All right, let's get started again. So we're going to just read through the text. You got a Bible, you can open up. I'm going to use this translation, which you don't have, unfortunately. That's okay. This is by a couple of guys, Bray and Hobbins. And obviously, if you're translating text from ancient Hebrew into English, there's more than one way to do it, right? There's lots of words that have multiple meanings, or how are you going to do the phrase? Are you going to focus more on the word or more on the, on the phrase meaning, that kind of stuff? This book is kind of interesting because it's only 11 chapters, but 3/4 of the book isn't the text. It's translators' notes about the text. So they'll talk about, well, here's why we picked this word as opposed to that word. And, in the King James, they picked this word, but in the ESV, they picked that word. And we actually like this one over here, and here's why. And so they nerd out on that. And it's kind of fun to read. So if you're into that kind of thing, this is a good read. The text we're going to have up here on the screen is going to be that text. It'll be close enough to what you've got, but I'm going to make a few edits as well. So let's start in. Now, I will say this too. The first story isn't just chapter 1. It actually goes into the first 3 verses of chapter 2 when whoever wrote Genesis, when they wrote it, they didn't have chapter and verse numbers. Those were added much, much, much later. And whoever put that in for some reason didn't break the story where it actually breaks. So we're going to go, story number 1 goes through 2 verse 3. So here we go. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth. Now, right away, we got an issue. Your Bible has a period there, right? It's probably better translated as an incomplete sentence. There's debate on this. Some scholars go one way, some go the other, but it definitely sets up what's coming, right? So, but if you put a period there, then you have the opportunity for something that's called the gap theory. And maybe you've heard of the gap theory. This was popularized in the 1800s, partly in response to evolution. I guess we are going to bring it up a little bit. But the gap theory is that Genesis 1 happened. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then there was a gap before Genesis 2. And the gap could have been hundreds of years or thousands of years or millions of years. We don't know. However long you want to make the gap. There was the gap. And something happened in the gap to take what God created and make it wild and waste, or tohu vavohu, or desolate and barren, or whatever your text says verse 2 starts with, right? We got to trace a little bit of the history of where the gap theory came from. So we go back to 8th century BC. There was a guy named Homer who was a Greek poet. We think, as best we know, Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. And these are 2 epic Greek poems that are foundational works of Greek literature, foundational works of Western civilization. The Iliad is about the Trojan War, and the Odyssey is about a warrior's journey home after the war. So he wrote these big epic poems. And then fast forward to the 1st century BC, so just a little bit before Jesus, and there was another poet named Virgil, and he wasn't Greek, he was Roman. And Virgil thought highly of himself and said, I'm the best poet. I'm going to write a poetry, an epic poem better than Homer. And so he wrote the Aeneid, and he based it off of the Iliad and Odyssey. And this one's been called the classic of all Europe. And it, of course, was studied throughout the Middle Ages, still studied today. And it's modeled after the Iliad and the Odyssey, but it follows a different person after the Trojan War. And that person ends up traveling to Italy, and I think they become like the ancestor of the founding of Rome or something like that, right? It's a big epic poem, and it's written in Latin. So we go from Greek, now we go to Latin. Well, fast forward a little bit later, we get into the Middle Ages, and there's this poet named Dante. He's Italian. This is Dante up here in the red. And Dante thinks highly of himself. We're now in the 1300s. And so he wants to write a poem that's even more epic than Virgil and Homer. And what could be more epic than taking a journey down into hell and back and up into paradise. And so that's what Dante writes. In the Divine Comedy, Dante travels down into hell and then into purgatory, because he's Catholic, and then up into paradise. And Dante's guide, this is Dante right here, this is Virgil. Dante made Virgil his guide through hell and purgatory, but Virgil didn't get to go to paradise. Yeah. But Dante did. So he one-ups Virgil with the Divine Comedy. So that's in the 1300s. And then we get to the 1600s, and we have John Milton writes a poem called Paradise Lost. And he writes in English because he's British, and he thinks highly of himself. And, like Homer and Virgil and Dante, those guys were great, but I'm going to write the most epic poem ever. So what could be more epic than a journey to hell and back and to paradise? So I'm going to write an epic that's like the history of the whole world, and I'm going to start with an epic battle. And so Milton starts with a 3-day heavenly battle before the creation of the world, where you've got Satan and his demons on one side and Michael the archangel and the other angels on the other side. A 3-day epic battle. No one can win. Jesus has to step in at the last minute and kick Satan and the demons out of heaven. And that's where the heavenly battle idea, the pre-creation heavenly battle idea came from. And that gets fast forwarded to the gap theory, where guys are saying, well, all right, we know like the earth is really old, so we got to have a gap in here. What happened? How do we get from like God creating the world to now the world is destroyed? Well, there must have been a big heavenly battle. Satan fell and he, destroyed the world, and now God starts over again. That's where that comes from, is this trajectory here. But that wasn't the way that any of the ancients read the text. They had no concept of a pre-creation battle. Now, some of you might say, well, what about the battle in Revelation, right? There's a heavenly battle in Revelation. If you go read that in Revelation, it happens at the birth of Christ, not at the pre-creation state, right? So anyway, the gap theory, bogus. There's no gap theory in the text itself. So now we're back. Let's go back into the text. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth, now the earth was extreme barrenness, and darkness was over the face of the ocean abyss. Now, remember, we're talking about the snow globe theory, right? It starts with just empty water and there's nothing, but there's God, and the spirit or breath or wind of God hovered over the face of the waters. That word, the Hebrew word is ruach, and it can mean spirit or breath or wind. All our translations are going to say Spirit of God. Well, we just have to pick one because we don't have a word that is all three. This comes up again in other places in the story where there's a play on words, right, with this multiple meaning, right? When Moses, puts his staff in the water to part the Red Seas, and God brings a wind. It says there's a wind that comes through and dries out the ocean. Like that's the wind of God over the ocean is the wind of God hovering over the face of the waters, right? That's a play on words. It's God and like, we're in the process of making a new creation. Pay attention, right? You should think of Genesis, right? So anyway, here we are. So we got the Spirit of God hovering over the waters, and God said, let there be light. And there was light, and God saw the light, and it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness, and God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning, a first day. So let's notice what God does. The Spirit of God hovers over the water, God says. So God speaks and declares something. He makes a declaration. And then God sees, and he makes a judgment about what he sees. He judges that it is good. So God sees and declares, God speaks and declares, he sees and judges. And then from there, God divides, right? Separates, brings order, structure, and he names. Calls the light day and the darkness he calls night. Now, those things aren't physical, material things. that God does? Are they? We're not talking about physical material structure at all, right? Remember our conversation about the frog. What God is doing is all the relationship and purpose, place and purpose stuff, the functional stuff, right? He's naming, he's giving order, he's declaring things. That's what he's doing here in the story. This has nothing to do with physical creation. Obviously, there is physical creation happening, but that's not what the writer's concerned about, right? All right, another thing to notice here is we've got God, and we've got his Spirit, and then what comes out of your mouth when you speak? Words come out of your mouth when you speak, right? So we've got God's word. Well, the word of the Lord is something that we see over and over in the Bible. In fact, later, one of the psalmists reflects on the creation. He says, by the word of the Lord, the heavens were made, and by the breath of his mouth, all their host. Breath and spirit are the same word, right? So here's the Spirit of God, and then here's the word of God. So the psalmist is reflecting on Genesis 1 and the creation account, and he says, God created through his word and through the Spirit. Now, if you've read the book of John, you know in the beginning, John says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And he goes on to tell us the Word is Jesus, right? The Word is a character. The Word of the Lord is a character that shows up over and over and over in the Old Testament. And he goes by lots of different names. And when he shows up in the New Testament, he's given the name Jesus. But in the Old Testament, he doesn't have that name yet, so we've got to have other names. I did an equip class a couple years ago called Seeing Jesus in the Old Testament, where we actually look at that. So if you want to see, wait, you said Jesus is the word of the Lord and he's in the Old Testament? Yeah, he's a main character in the Old Testament. You want to dive into that? Check out that equip class on the website. You can watch it, and we go deep into Jesus as the word of the Lord, as the angel of the Lord, as these other characters in the Old Testament. There's a rabbinic writing called Pesika Rabbati, and it's a bunch of rabbi sayings, rabbis talking to each other. And it was collected in the Middle Ages, maybe 600 to 900 AD, somewhere in there. But most of the sayings they record are older than that, and some are much, much older than that. In the story, or in the text, the rabbis start discussing the book of Isaiah. And they discuss Isaiah 60. So here's what they talk about. They're quoting Isaiah 60 right now. Arise, my light, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. For behold, darkness will cover the earth, and thick darkness will cover the nations, and the Lord will rise upon you, and his glory will be seen upon you. This is what was said by the Holy Spirit through David. In your light will be seen. So Isaiah 60 is a messianic prophecy, right? They're talking, all right, like Jesus said, I am the light of the world. He's playing off of this. So Isaiah is, God is talking to the Messiah and calling the Messiah his light. But it sounds a lot like creation, doesn't it? Like there's darkness on the face, darkness covering the earth, and then there's a light that rises. And they connect it to the Psalm of David, in your light will be seen. And then they ask, all right, well, there's two lights. There's a light that we see, and then there's a light we don't see. And so they start wrestling with that. And they say, well, what is it in your light that light will be seen? What is the light? What light is it that the assembly of Israel expects? And they say, well, this is the light of Messiah. Okay, I'm tracking so far, right? Isaiah is a prophetic book. There's prophecies about the Messiah. God is calling the Messiah his light. And the rabbis are tracking and saying, well, okay, that psalm was also talking about the Messiah. But then they go off on this weird place. Look where they go. They say, as it is said, and God saw the light that it was good. And they quote Genesis 1:4. Well, that's kind of strange that they go there, isn't it? And now they answer why they go there. They say, this teaches that the Holy One, blessed be he, that means God the Father, anticipated the Messiah and his works before the creation of the world, and also hid away his anointed one, the Messiah, under the throne of his glory until the generation he will appear. So the rabbis are saying, when God created light on day one, what he actually created wasn't physical light. He created the plan of the Messiah. That was the light he created on day one. That's how they're interpreting this text. And you can see how they got there because they go to Isaiah and they say, well, Isaiah calls the Messiah the light. And David says that there's physical light and then there's another light that helps us see the physical light. And surely that light must be connected to the light on day one. And so that's got to be the Messiah. So they're drawing all these conclusions, right? Well, before I read that, I never would have thought that the light on day one was the plan for Messiah. That would have not come to my mind, right? But the rabbis, they're doing this like Jewish interpretation thing that we talk about in that other equip class, and that's the conclusion they come to. Now they go on and tell the story of how God and Messiah, before the creation of the world, God and Messiah got together and they had a conversation. And God the Father says, all right, here's my plan. I want you to be Messiah. That means you're going to have to come and suffer and die, but then you'll rise again and I'll give you the world to rule. What do you think? And Messiah says, well, okay, I'll do that if you give me all the people of Israel. God says, okay. And Messiah keeps going. He says, actually, I want not just all the people of Israel. I want all the people of the whole world. Actually, I don't want just all the people of the whole world. I want all the people of all the possible worlds that could ever exist. If you give me all of that, I'll be Messiah. I'll do the plan. And God says, great, it's a deal. And then they shake hands and go, and they don't actually shake hands in the story, but they agree, they make an agreement and they go on. And that's the story that the rabbis tell. Well, that's a crazy, for us, that feels like a really crazy way to interpret Genesis 1:4, doesn't it? Yeah. But that's the work that they're doing. Okay, moving on. Notice as we read through this, notice the snow globe cosmology, right? God said, let there be a firmament in the middle of the waters and let it be a divider between the waters and the waters. And God made the firmament and he divided the waters that were under the firmament from the waters that were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heavens. And there was evening and there was morning, a second day. So now we got the snow globe, right? And God is dividing and separating and declaring and speaking. And he keeps going. God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered to one place and let dry land be seen. And it was so. So now we're on that next step in the snow globe, right? And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering of the waters he called seas. So now he's naming things again and separating and declaring. And God saw that it was good. And God said, let the earth become green with green shoots and grain sowing seed and fruit trees making fruit after their kind, which had seed in it upon the earth. And it was so. And the earth brought forth green shoots and grain sowing seed after its kind, and trees making fruit. Notice that the earth is actually the thing doing the creating here. And then or as we would think of it, like the physical making, right? The earth is the thing that's making. But God's the one that's declaring and organizing and separating and all that kind of stuff. And God saw that it was good, and there was evening and there was morning, a third day. And God said, let there be lights in the firmament. Notice where the lights are. They're in the firmament, right, of the heavens to divide the day from the night. That's the ancient Near Eastern worldview that the stars and the moon and the sun, they live on the surface of the dome, right? Like this, if we don't have that worldview, this feels weird and doesn't make sense. But as soon as we have that worldview, this starts making perfect sense, right? And let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years, and let them serve as lights in the firmament of the heavens to give light upon the earth. And it was so. Signs is like omens. So like think of the eclipse that we talked about earlier, right? That would be a heavenly sign, right? In the ancient world, they were very fascinated with the stars, the movement of the stars and the sun and the moon, and they tracked all those things. And if something happened out of place, if it was out of order, that was usually a bad sign that something was about to happen. And Pharaoh or whoever's job was to bring order to the world wasn't doing their job. They had failed. Okay, and seasons is not just like agricultural seasons, like when it's time to plant and when it's time to harvest. It's also festival seasons. When is it time to celebrate Passover? And when is it time to celebrate, the Feast of Booths or that kind of thing? So the lights in the sky have a job, right? God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night and the stars. That's all the stars get is 3 words. And God set them in the firmament of the heavens. Notice they're in the firmament to give light upon the earth and to rule over the day and the night and to divide the light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and morning. So notice that the lights are given a job to do. They are to divide light and darkness, and they're to rule. So God gives the lights place and purpose, right? He names them, he gives them place and purpose and relationship, and he gives them rulership. Now, rulership can only go to something that has agency. Inanimate objects can't rule, right? Well, we use rule that way sometimes. That rules, right? But in this use of rule, you have to have agency to rule, right? Humans can rule because we can make choices. So in the ancient mindset, the stars and the sun and the moon were alive. They were spirit beings, right? And in fact, often the biblical writers tell the Jews, quit worshiping the sun and the moon and the stars. You're worshiping them like they're the one true God, the supreme God, but they're not. But in the ancient world, they saw them as living beings. They're the spirit beings, right? And they're given a job to rule the firmament, just like we're given a job to rule the earth. C.S. Lewis, how many of you read Chronicles of Narnia? Classic, right? I need to reread it again. It's so good. Read it to my kids. In The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, that book, there's some kids who have traveled to this mythical world called Narnia. It's real. You can't get there except through magic. But they're in this other alternate world, and they're traveling on this boat, the Dawn Treader, on this epic voyage. And at some point, they meet another character called Ramondu, and Ramondu is a star, a Narnian star. And then in Narnia, the stars can talk and speak just like the animals can talk and speak in Narnia. And so Eustace, one of the children, he has this conversation with Ramondu. And Eustace says, in our world, a star is a huge ball of flaming gas. And Ramondu replies, even in your world, my son, that is not what a star is, but only what it is made of. So C.S. Lewis is trying to make a distinction between material composition and the real nature of something, the spiritual nature of something, right? Being a ball of gas, that's not your identity if you're a star. It's what you're made of, but it's not your identity, all right? And as a human, like I'm made of flesh and skin and bones and blood and fat and too much fat right now and all kinds of stuff. But that's not who I am. That's not who I am. That's not my identity, right? I'm made of those things, but that's not my identity. In the ancient world, they thought of stars as actually being spirit beings. All right, let's keep going. And God said, let the waters swarm with a swarm of animate living things, and the flying things, let them fly above the earth, upon the face of the firmament of the heavens. And God created, notice the first thing God creates that's not in the sky, the great sea dragons. Your Bible might say the whales or the sea creatures or something like that. The word is actually tanin, and it's a synonym to Leviathan. If you read the book of Job, there's the Leviathan, right? But it's a sea dragon. Remember when we looked at the Babylonian creation story, Marduk had to fight the sea dragon named Mot, right? Or the Canaanite story, there's a sea dragon in there, right? That's a classic motif of like chaos, because the ocean is untamed and uncontrollable. And here, God creates the sea dragon and all animate living things that dart about, with which the waters swarm after their kinds, and all the winged flying things after their kind. And God saw that it was good. So when the sea dragon shows up in the biblical story, it's not an enemy, not at first at least. And it's something that's good. And it's like a little plaything that God just like makes and tosses out there, to go play in the ocean and have fun, right? That's very different than the other creation stories. And God blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply and fill the waters of the seas, and the flying things, let them multiply on the earth. And there was evening and morning, a fifth day. So again, God is is declaring and giving things place and purpose, right? The sea dragon in most ancient Near Eastern cultures, the sea dragon actually has like a god status, like an evil god status, but not in this story. However, when you go to Psalm 72, now you get some of that like battling the sea dragon language in the psalm. So the psalmist here, he's looking back to the Exodus story when Pharaoh and his armies are chasing after the Israelites. They've got them cornered. Moses parts the sea. The people go through and Pharaoh's armies chase after him. And then God collapses the sea in on Pharaoh and his armies. And they're scattered on the shore. Their dead bodies are scattered on the shore, right? He's looking back on that story and he's thinking with like mythical eyes to retell that story. And here's what he says. God, my king, is from of old, working salvation in the midst of the earth. You divided the sea by your might, right? God parted the sea for the Israelites. And you broke the heads of the Tannin, the sea dragon, on the waters. You crushed the heads of the Leviathan, and you gave him as food for the creatures of the wilderness. And so the psalmist is imagining Pharaoh and his armies as if they're the sea dragon. And they go into the sea, and then God destroys them and crushes them. And that's how he's telling the story. Well, the sea dragon shows up in lots of ancient things. So up the top up here, this little tablet was found at Tel Hazor in Israel. And this is called the Tel Hazor warrior. We don't have a name for him, but look what he's battling. He's got a spear here he's getting ready to use. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-headed sea serpent, right? He's got a 7-headed sea dragon. And down here, this is from Sumer, the ancient culture of Sumer, which is the Sumerians were like super, super old, like even before Abraham old, like 3000 BC. This guy is Ninurta, which some scholars connect with the biblical character Nimrod. But he's Ninurta, a famous Sumerian warrior. And he's battling 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-headed dragon as well. Now this dragon has legs. Sometimes the 7-headed dragon shows up as a snake. Sometimes he shows up more as legs, but it's always the 7-headed sea dragon. Sometimes he has legs, sometimes he doesn't. All the ancient texts all have this guy. And he shows up in the book of Revelation. If you read Revelation, there's a 7-headed dragon in there too. Crazy, huh? But he comes to represent chaos and death and destruction. Bible Project actually does a video on the dragon if you want to like nerd out on the dragon. It's kind of fun. All right, moving on. But in this story, God creates the dragon for his pleasure and just for fun, right? It's good. That's very different than the culture around the Jews. God said, let the earth bring forth animate living things after their kind, cattle and darting things and beasts of the earth after their kind, and it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth after their kind, cattle after their kind, darting things on the ground after their kind, and God saw that it was good. And so again, God is assigning things a place and a purpose in the world.
Now we're standing face to face.
Oh, Vanessa.
Isn't this world a crazy place?
You guys remember this song?
Just when I thought
If you were alive in 1991 or 1992 and you turned on the radio at all, you heard Save the Best for Last. Unless you were listening to country music. This was the #1 hit in 91 and 92. It was nominated for 3 Grammys. ASCAP declared it the most played song of 1992, Save the Best for Last. We often read the creation story with this narrative. God saves the best for last. And who's the best and who's the last? Me. That's not... The writers of the Bible did not know Vanessa Williams. They did not get the privilege of hearing this beautiful song. They did not know the save the best for last. They knew the right of the firstborn. And the right of the firstborn says whoever's born first is the best. And whoever is born first gets all the authority and all the privileges and all that kind of stuff. The firstborn son gets the rulership of the family after the father. Whoever's last gets nothing. That's the biblical world. Now, in the biblical world, and you read the Bible, often God does the opposite. God exalts the second or the lastborn above the firstborn. But it's always an exception to the rule. The rule is the right of the firstborn. And so when it happens, when the younger is exalted over the older, it should be shocking, right? Cain and Abel, God blesses Abel, doesn't bless Cain. Cain was born first. It's shocking to Cain. Cain gets so mad about it, he commits murder, and he didn't even know murder existed, right? You get to Jacob and Esau, the second-born exalted above the firstborn. You get to Joseph and his brothers, right? Joseph is exalted above his older brothers. There's even, when you get to Jesus, we get pretty good evidence that Jesus had older brothers, not from Mary, but from Joseph. And Jesus is exalted over them. So, but it's the exception to the rule. It's not the rule. So when we get to the creation story and man's created last, it should be shocking that then God exalts man. The Jews saw this as the reason for the rebellion of the serpent. Who was created first outside of, first sun, moon, and stars were created, the spirit beings. And then after the spirit beings, what's the first thing on the lower part of the world that's created? The sea dragon. And the sea dragon is often connected to the serpent and connected to Satan too, right? So, and a snake is an animal that slithers. It's created before humankind. So whoever the serpent is, if the serpent is just a snake, or the serpent is a sea dragon, or the serpent is a spirit being, either way, the serpent was created before mankind. So then the Jews, when they're retelling the story, they say, the serpent, when God exalted humanity, the serpent got prideful and arrogant and said, I'm not bowing down to the thing that was created after me. Why would I do that? I'm older. And that's what stirred up in him the idea of rebelling and ruining God's creation. So now we get to, God said, let us make man in our image. We'll talk about what does that mean? After our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the flying things of the heavens and the cattle and the darting things that dart about the earth. And God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created he him, male and female, created he them. And God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the flying things of the heavens and over every beast that darts about on the earth. Remember, in the ancient mindset, to make something isn't to physically make something. It's to give something an identity and a place and a purpose. And so what God does here for humanity. Obviously, God physically makes us, right? But that's not what the story is talking about or focusing on. The story is focusing on God giving humanity a place and a purpose. What does it mean to be made in God's image? This is an idol. This is a statue of El, the Canaanite supreme deity. Remember, we talked about El and the Baal cycle. This is El. Here he is. And we could call this an idol, but we could also call this an image. That's what it is. It's an image. And image language and idol language are the same thing to an ancient person. An idol or an image is a physical representative of a spirit being. So spirit beings live on the firmament, but they want a physical representative to rule for them, kind of underneath them here on earth. And so mankind makes idols, and then a priest has a ceremony where the breath is breathed into the idol, and then the idol now becomes the physical representative of that spirit being. And that language is what's happening in Genesis 1 here. It's the idol process of creation. God, we sometimes think of being God's image as an ability, right? And the ancients wrestled with this too. What does it mean to be made in God's image? Does it mean that I can reason and think? Does it mean that I can work and do stuff with my hands? Maybe it means we corporately can have a culture building and stuff, right? The more we learn about the animal kingdom, the more we see animals have intelligence, and animals have culture, and some animals can do things we can't do, right? And if you start taking this idea of ability and you really start wrestling with it, then what do we do with people who have disabilities? Are they created in God's image? What if they're like really, really severe disabilities? Are they created in God's image? If it's an ability, the answer would be no, they're not. Well, that doesn't seem right? But God's image is not an ability, it's a status. So a status means like they're an appointment to something. If the Queen of England gives me a knighthood, that's a new status that I can take on, right? Or if the president appoints me as the ambassador to Ireland, then I move to Ireland and I'm America's representative in Ireland and I have authority in Ireland to act for the benefit of America in Ireland, right? That's a status that I've been given. And that's what it means to be in God's image, to be an image bearer. And when God commands us, don't make idols, it's because he already made an idol. He made humans. We're the idol. We're the image bearer, right? We don't need another image bearer. God already made one. And the command in the Ten Commandments, don't bear the name in vain, isn't about cussing. Bearing the name is, am I representing God appropriately? Am I being a good idol? Am I being a good image bearer? And that appointment was given to Adam and Eve, right? And then it was kind of revoked when they were kicked out of the garden. And it was given to Abraham again. God said, in you I'm going to bless the nations. And then it was given to Israel again at Mount Sinai. And then Israel kind of screwed it up, right? And they rebelled and kind of lost the status. They were kicked out of the land. And then it was given to Jesus. And Jesus is the true image, the full 100% image of God, because he is God and he is man, right? And then we in Jesus as Christians, as followers of Jesus, we get to participate with Jesus in being the image of God. And being the image of God means we have a place and a purpose in his kingdom to rule and care for the world for him and with him. And so God keeps going. He says, here now I give you all grain sowing seed that is upon the face of the earth, and all trees in which there is the fruit of the tree sowing seed. For you they shall be for eating. So God now provides for us. And for every beast of the earth and every flying thing in the heavens and everything that darts about on the earth, wherever there's animate life, all green of grain is for eating. And so God provides now. He's given place and purpose to humans and animals, and now he provides sustenance for us. And it was so, and God saw everything that he had made, and lo, it was exceedingly good, and there was evening and morning the sixth day. So now creation is exceedingly good. This is another knock against the gap theory, right? Satan couldn't have rebelled before this because there's no bad. It's exceedingly good, right? And the heavens and the earth were finished and all their host. On the seventh day, God finished his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. And he blessed the seventh day and declared it holy, because on it he rested from all his work which God had created and made. Notice how it's finished, rested. So one of the things that the text is saying is God knows when something's done. He knows when it's enough. And we have a hard time deciding when enough is enough. But God knows when enough is enough, right? This idea of it is finished shows up again, right? In the New Testament, Jesus on the cross, what does he say? It is finished. That hits back to Jesus is doing a new creation work. And on the cross, he finishes what he needs to accomplish for that new creation work. And then you go to Revelation. At the end of Revelation, Jesus is sitting on the throne and he says, it is done. And that hints back again, right? To this it is finished thing. This idea of resting, Sabbathing, isn't about not doing any work. It's about being present and enjoying what you have. So God has finished building his temple. The world is his temple. Now he comes and dwells in his temple and enjoys what he has. This which God had created and made at the very end, the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation, says which God had begun to make. And they're the Jews who are making that translation. They're just trying to, like, had created and made is kind of weird language, and they're trying to, like, how do we spell that out? And they say, well, God's still working. This is God resting from what he started. So, that's an interpretation, whether you buy that or not. I don't know, the Jews in the Septuagint, that's how they saw it. The Basika Rabati, we talked about that already. Here they say, as this rabbi's talking about the text, the dedication of the creation of the world as it is written, now the heavens and the earth were completed, Genesis 2:1. Completion is the language of dedication, and they mean temple dedication. So the rabbis are looking at Genesis, this first creation story, and they're saying this is God building his temple and then coming and completing it and dwelling in it. That's what the story is about. So I just said that. Genesis 1 tells the story of God creating and finishing his temple, establishing his image. A temple has to have an idol in it, right? If you're thinking about the ancient world, a temple had an idol in it. God places an idol in his temple. It's humanity. And then he comes and dwells and rules from the temple. So that's the cultural context of how this story is written. It's kind of placing the creation story within temple building stories that you would read in other cultures. Tracking so far?